It's Wednesday, the 19th of October. This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Conservative MP Nickie Aiken, Labour's Kim Leadbeater, Alison Phillips from the Daily Mirror and LBC's Iain Dale. Today,
I will not be putting my heating on until I'm absolutely freezing. I just won't do it.
will pensions keep up with rising prices?
I know your viewers would want me to give certainty here and now. I'm not in a position to do that.
Will Liz Truss keep her pledge to crack down on strikes?
If ministers want to pick a fight with us, we are more than ready.
Animal rights campaigners have been pouring away milk. We'll ask them why they're taking this action. And a huge day for Liz Truss as she faces Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions. It is Liz Truss's third Prime Minister's Questions since last Wednesday. Not much has happened. She sacked her Chancellor, appointed Jeremy Hunt as his replacement. He's junked almost her entire economic prospectus, leaving her leadership hanging by a thread. So my opening question for today, Nickie, to you first, is what does Liz Truss need to do today at the dispatch box? Well,
I think she has to do exactly what she's been doing this week. You know, she's accepted that the growth plan is not... it's a matter of timing for me, Jo. Everything in the growth plan I agree with, but it was a matter of timing. And
so you agreed with all the tax cuts that have just been junked? Absolutely. I'm a Conservative. I'm a low tax, small state Conservative. But it was about timing. And the fact that the markets reacted the way it did, she has accepted that it was the wrong time. And you know, she's got Jeremy Hunt in now. And I think he's really has come in a calm head and is taking a relook at everything. So what's the point of Liz Truss? She is the Prime Minister. She was elected in a democratic process only a few weeks ago. But everything she stood on is pretty well gone. And she's accepted that. She has made that very clear that mistakes were made. She said sorry, and now we move on and we wait for the Chancellor's statement on the 31st. Kim Leadbeater, what do you want to hear from Liz Truss today? What does she need to do?
Well, I probably disagree with Nickie in terms of it being a matter of timing. I think it's a matter of time. I think it's a matter of time before Liz Truss goes. And my bigger concern around that is the damage that is being done to our country and to our constituents at this really important time. So all I've done really since I came into Parliament about 16 months ago now is watch the government and the Conservative Party eat itself alive at the expense of our international reputation and to the detriment of the people that we are paid to represent. And I find it heartbreaking that we are seeing scenes, as you've just shown in the footage there, of people who literally cannot afford to put their toaster on, who cannot afford to heat their babies' bottles. These are people's real lives. And all I'm seeing down here in Westminster is Conservative MPs in corners going through this repetitive power struggle as to see who can be the next one to step forward and try and save the sinking ship. And I find it very depressing and I find it very upsetting. And I am, most people will tell you, one of the most positive people you can meet, but it's not good. It's not good for our country and it's not good for our constituents. We'll talk about some of the things that you have just mentioned in terms of cost of living and decisions that the government is going to have to make, according to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. Do you have faith in Liz Truss? Is she going to lead you into the next election? Look, we need to have economic stability. We're all clear about that. I do not want to see coverage like you've just seen now of a pensioner worried about putting the heating on. That is unacceptable. But whose fault is that? But then we need political stability as well. So at the moment, we need to steady the ship. We need to let the Chancellor do what he's going to be doing over the next 2 weeks, looking properly at what we should be doing, and then we move on. What does Liz Truss need to do?
Well, I think probably for her own political survival, such as it will be in the short term, she needs to see that she can string a sentence together in PMQ'S today, because she needs to get some confidence from her backbenchers. But I think we're all agreeing it's a matter of time. What the country, I think, needs her to do is is properly hold our hands up to the situation we're in. There's so much talk over the last few weeks about confidence in the markets, and so work has been done now to restore some confidence in the markets. But what about confidence of the people? All those people that today have woken up thinking, right, the triple lock might be going on pensions. All the people that were concerned about the social care. We finally thought we might have a solution to that. That's going. There's all the concerns about what they're minding for health and education. And yes, there's been, Liz Truss has said in previous weeks, oh, don't worry, I'm not going to touch health, I'm not going to touch education, I'm not going to touch defence. But we cannot believe a single thing that she said now. So what about the people who need confidence?
What should she do?
Well, she's got to give the most stonking performance ever that a Prime Minister has ever given at Prime Minister's questions. It's as simple as that, because the mood on the Tory backbenches, Nickie knows this, is, I mean, they're about, we understand that there may well be over 100 of them that have now expressed no confidence in her to Sir Graham Brady. He's been having frantic meetings apparently with the Chancellor as well, which, I mean, you think, well, why is he doing that? And she needs, I mean, I hear what you say, Alison, about stringing a sentence together, but she needs to do a hell of a lot more than that.
I mean, in terms of just talking about some of the Westminster machinations, if you're saying that many letters have gone in, no confidence letters to Graham Brady, the senior Conservative in charge of the Committee of Backbench Conservative MPs, would that not precipitate another leadership contest?
Well, you would have thought so, wouldn't you? But the rules, I gather, say that a new Prime Minister has a year's grace. So they've already reached the 54 target. We understand. We think it's a lot more than that. But he's saying, well, it needs to be half the parliamentary party. So about 170, 180 letters before he will do anything. But he must have told Liz Truss this. And just, I mean, think of it from a human point of view, from a confidence point of view. I mean, you can already tell by her demeanour that interview she did with Chris Mason, her confidence is shot.
Yes, well, talking of Chris Mason, very conveniently, we have him ready. Our political editor, the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. Let's just do the human element first of all, Chris, because, yes, Iain Dale mentioned the interview that you did with her about can she survive, how long can she survive, what's happened to her authority. She carried out that bizarre press conference on Friday where she looked lost and disoriented. You know, how's it going to feel today, standing up in the Commons chamber after everything that has happened to her leadership and have to face Keir Starmer and her own backbenchers?
We should never forget the human, because it's absolutely the core, isn't it, of how an individual, whether a minister or anyone else, a prime minister, experiences, you know, a big moment. And let's be frank, it's going to be humiliating for the prime minister this lunchtime. It can't be anything other than that, when on just one specific, which normally, by the way, would be huge, but in the context of what's swirling around is just one of many things, that last week there was that exchange around spending cuts with Keir Starmer, where she said absolutely, you know, they'd be sticking to the plan. And of course now we're at this point where absolutely everything is on the table. And then there's everything else, the wholesale junking of her entire programme for government. So yeah, it'll be abjectly embarrassing, I think, for Liz Truss. What can she possibly say to, and I know not even reassure is the right word, because Conservative MPs are not reassured, but what could she possibly say to try and improve the situation? And just to give you some sense of how bleak things are really for Liz Truss, when you speak to people around her, there have been these meetings going on with Conservative backbenchers. There was a good number of them in Downing Street last night. And what I'm hearing is that the Prime Minister is buoyed a little by those conversations. But what is happening is that they are now defining the positive by the absence of the negative. So no one has resigned, or at least no one has resigned yet. So you get a sense of how, you know, desperate things are for them. That, yeah, that they're seeking the positive because things haven't turned quite as bad as they could do, you know, in the coming days or weeks, if that is how long there is to run. The other thing, which I think is curious but interesting in terms of their current strategy, and we heard this actually repeatedly from the Prime Minister when I was talking to her the other night, is that she is talking about being the kind of personification right now of stability. Now, that might seem absurd given what's happened in the last week, but the argument you're hearing from her and from those who are publicly supportive of her right now is that the alternative, some sort of situation where she is toppled and another Prime Minister emerges, or there is talk of a general election, would be the exact opposite of stability. It would be profoundly unstable. So that's the argument you're hearing, and I think you'll hear it again, that thought that if you end up with a replacement, then the clamour for a general election will grow. And if you're a Conservative MP right now and you look at the opinion polls, you know, a general election is not exactly top of your shopping list.
Right, well, absolutely. I mean, that is the setting and the backdrop for today. Questions about how long Liz Truss can survive as Prime Minister. I mean, one headline we can show viewers in The Independent, Michael Gove, the former Cabinet Minister, obviously a critic, as we know, of Liz Truss, saying no longer question of if Liz Truss goes, but when. We have that statement, that important statement from Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, on October the 31st. But in the meantime, today, here in Westminster, there is a sense that there now is a bit of a sort of a tension, if you like, a dilemma for the government in terms of what their own Conservative MPs might do this afternoon in what we call an opposition day debate on an issue of fracking. This from the journalist Kevin Schofield is a tweet, Chris, that says, message to Tory MPs from Deputy Chief Whip Craig Whitaker declares that this afternoon's vote on fracking, Labour want to ban it for good, is a confidence motion in the government. Lots of Tory MPs, as we know, are opposed to fracking in their areas. One MP says, big test. What's going on?
So what is going on is the kind of magnification of a particular issue into a broader argument that the government is making. So on the specific of fracking, you'll remember that Liz Truss has argued that it should be allowed to happen in communities that are happy to sanction it. Open brackets, there aren't many who seem to be volunteering, but nonetheless that's her principle. So there's a vote around that, but as you say, the government is turning it into a confidence matter. They are saying, look, you cannot have a situation where you are the government and the opposition are trying to take control of the business of Parliament. So they are saying in the vote to come a little later, just bring you a little more from the note that's been circulated amongst them, we cannot under any circumstances let the Labour Party take control of the order paper and put through their own legislation and whatever other bits of legislation they desire. We are voting no, and I reiterate, this is a hard three-line whip. Parliamentary speak for you better turn up. And all slips will be withdrawn. In other words, you really have to turn up. And we will then come on to the government amendment, which is also a three-line whip. There's an acknowledgement then, just to escape the parliamentary speak. I know this is difficult for some colleagues, splash of understatement there, but we simply cannot allow this. Please speak with your whips with any issues. So what's going on here is the government saying, come on then, who are our real opponents here? Yes, there is this very live debate about the Prime Minister's future, but remember who our real opponents are in the grand scheme of things, pointing across the House towards Labour, the SNP and others, with the prospect, of course, that if the instability continues, to come back to my point a moment ago, in the back of Conservative MPs' minds might be that things run away from themselves and you end up with an election much sooner than is currently scheduled.
Chris Mason, thank you very much. Is that a risky strategy, Nickie?
We've seen this a few times that the Labour Party have tried under Boris's premiership, that they would use opposition day to try to take over the order paper, and you know they are the opposition, and so we can't.
But the government's wanting to make this a confidence issue
because it's a parliamentary process. And I said
a lot of your colleagues are very against fracking.
Absolutely, and you know it was a manifesto pledge that we wouldn't introduce it. So, but it's not about the fracking. It's about the fact the Labour Party want to take over the order paper, and that can't be allowed.
Why pick a fight like this? It is ridiculous. It shows the whips have lost control. You already had two MPs, Maria Caulfield and Steve Double, publicly announced yesterday that they would vote against any attempt to abolish the triple lock on pensions. I mean, the whips do not have control of the parliamentary party at the moment, and this kind of initiative, if I can call it that, is actually going to make things worse.
Right. It's not about us trying to take over the order paper. It's about us trying to actually get some business through the House on an issue that people care about.
All right, well, we'll come back to that probably after PMQs, but let's stick with the theme about what is happening to government, because Daily Mail, the front page, millions facing pain on pensions. This, of course, all in the light of Jeremy Hunt saying there are going to be eye-watering decisions going to be made in that statement. If we can roll on to the next headline, UK pensions U-turn leaves Truss facing fresh peril. And the final paper in the Express, don't dare go back on pension triple lock. That is because no cabinet minister has been able to commit the government to its manifesto promise to increase pensions by what they call the triple lock, by whatever is highest, average earnings 2.5% or inflation. Inflation is at 10.1%. Should the government commit and keep their manifesto promise?
The Chancellor's said there's going to have to be eye-watering decisions made. I would hope that would not involve the triple lock. As we said, I stood on a manifesto pledge to keep the triple lock, as did the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. But we are 3 years in now. We have spent hundreds of billions of pounds keeping people in jobs, keeping businesses afloat during the COVID pandemic. And so the Chancellor has been very clear. So let us wait and see. There's all this speculation, Joe. Before every budget and every financial statement, there's always speculation in the papers about what will go, what will come in.
Fueled by the government.
You can't punish pensioners for the mess of the last few weeks.
I absolutely agree. And we're seeing, and we saw in your beginning of your programme today, pensioners not wanting to put on their heating. That is unacceptable. We have got to make sure that we support the vulnerable.
Right, so you want the government to keep the triple lock?
I would want to keep to our manifesto pledge, but as the Chancellor said, nothing's off the table at the moment.
But Liz Truss,
we don't have to go that far.
But Liz Truss said last Wednesday, there will be no cuts to spending. Can we believe anything that she says?
Well, she has accepted now that the growth plan was the wrong plan at the time, and therefore the new Chancellor is looking at everything. Nothing is off the table, but I really do hope we can keep to that manifesto pledge.
But I think that is what's underlying the whole thing. It's such a complete and utter breakdown of trust across the whole of society now. People just do not know what to believe, and it may be that the triple lock isn't touched in the end. But of course, that's if it is. We're at 10.1% on inflation today. The anxiety that is causing people, that poor woman who can't turn her heating on, that is, and so much this could be addressed if people could just start telling the truth and then sticking to the truth.
Let's have a look at this from the BBC economics editor Faisal Islam. As we said, rate of inflation back up to 10.1% in September on target consumer prices index measure, 5 times target. Normally used as basis for uprating rises in pensions under the triple lock that we've talked about and benefits and tax credits for April, but that is unclear right now. Let's try again on benefits. Should they be uprated in line with that 10.1% as stated for September, going up in April?
Again, the Chancellor said he's looking at everything. I would hope that we can keep benefits along with inflation, but you can't. But Joe, at the moment, we have got a global economic. Let me finish. Yeah. We've got a global economic catastrophe going on at the moment. We have got the largest energy supplier at war with the largest food supplier. None of us saw this a year ago, and so we've got to look at what's happening now and decide what is best for our economic stability.
Well, Nickie Aiken, that is true. There are global forces at work. We know that, affecting everybody. The problem is that economists, even your own Conservatives, would say it was the mini budget. It was your own policies that built in what they now call a risk premium to the UK that has made all these things so much worse. Boris Johnson promised that the benefits would be uprated in line with inflation. But you can't promise that either.
Well, the Chancellor was very clear on Monday that his priority is to help the most vulnerable and protect the most vulnerable. And, we'll have to wait and see in 2 weeks' time. I really do hope we will, because, we have to be a compassionate Conservative Party.
Everything's on the table.
Well, it is. And look, the job of a government is to promise things in a manifesto and then tell us how they're going to be paid for. And Jeremy Hunt is going to face some very difficult choices, exacerbated. I mean, he's only there because of the failure of the mini-budget, so he's got to make those choices based on that. Now, he will be thinking, are pensioners as a group, are they better off than people on universal credit as a group? And you could argue, and of course there are lots of pensioners who are in dire poverty, like the lady that we saw earlier, but you could argue, and he may well argue this, that pensioners as a group maybe are not the most deserving group for an inflation-proof uplift. A hugely controversial thing to do, but you would have to say that people on universal credit probably need it more than pensioners do.
All right, well, we'll see if he makes that argument.
We got to a point where we are pitching pensioners against people on universal credit.
I don't mean to do that.
Well, let's get Labour's let's get Labour's answer on this from you, Kim. Is the Labour Party committed now to the pensions triple lock?
The commitment to the triple lock came from the Tories in their manifesto. It's their responsibility to stick to that and find a way to pay for it.
But are you committing to it?
We will do everything we can to make sure that that triple lock doesn't go. The problem we've got at the minute is we don't have all the information in front of us, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Well, hang on a second. You can commit to the triple lock. You can commit to increasing pensions by whatever is highest of those three measures as a principle. Will you do that?
And I think as a principle we do commit to it, absolutely. But until we have got an OBR forecast and we've got all the facts and figures in front of us, it's very, very difficult. The way things are going, things literally change day to day.
Today could skewer Liz Truss on this. His first question, I announced today that my party commits to the triple lock. Will you, Prime Minister?
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, you know, we are making decisions in very uncertain circumstances. And I think in principle, we know that the people we need to protect in our society are the pensioners, are the workers, are the people on benefits, are the people with disabilities. Okay. But we haven't got the full package of information in front of us.
No, but you've got quite a lot of information. And if you are going to commit to all of those things, Kim, where are you going to find the money? Is it going to be from tax rises? Is it going to be from the sort of spending cuts that we've just heard from, but not in the areas you've just outlined, that long list? Or is it going to be government borrowing?
Right, so we need an OBR forecast and we need to have all that information in front of us to make those decisions. Things are literally changing day by day by day at the moment, so it's very, very difficult for us to make any sort of very, very, you know, definitive commitments. But I'll tell you what, I would say I'd rather have Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer making those decisions than whoever the Tories wheel out next.
But why? Based on what evidence? I mean, we know from the Office for Budget Responsibility and the Institute for Fiscal Studies that borrowing is still going to be in the region of around £100 billion in 26-27. What will Keir Starmer do? He needs to set out if, as all of you seem to be saying, Liz Truss is on a precipice at the moment, there could be a general election, he's got to be able to set out how he would deal with that.
Yeah, and that's the piece of work that Keir and Rachel and the whole team are doing as we speak. And we're ready for a general election, so that work is being done literally
so he will make spending
cuts.
He'll have to make spending cuts too.
He'll have to make some difficult decisions. And as we've said, you know, there are difficult decisions to be taken. But the last 4 weeks have made things worse, not better. And that is the point.
Well, let's have a look at another area. We've talked about pensions and the triple lock could be on the table despite promises from the government. Benefits, we don't know whether they will rise in line with inflation as promised by the previous administration under Boris Johnson. Now, Jeremy Hunt, set to postpone cap on social care costs. This was another proposal under Boris Johnson. Should it be postponed? Should it be kept?
I've been through the social care situation at the moment with my father last year, and I know how tough it is trying to get social care for our elderly parents. And so we have got to spend time now changing and reforming the social care system. It is completely...
Well, so should that social care cap come in? That would be from October 2023. No one with high level of need would pay £86,000 over their lifetime for personal care, more than. Local authorities would pay additional costs for personal care, washing, eating, medication, etc., but not health treatment. Should that social care cap come in as proposed?
I would like to see that. I'd like to see our manifesto pledges kept to, but as I've said throughout this programme, we are in such a different place now from the economy and on a global scale. So let's see what does the
manifesto pledge stand for anymore if it can just be on a whim? I mean, Jeremy Hunt's already got a form for not taking action on social care when he was in health. Yep. So back in 2015. So he spent the last 4, 5, 6 years afterwards saying, oh, I really regret we didn't do more on social care. I really regret. Is that what he's going to do for the next 5 years? I really regret.
I don't think anybody's in denial at all that the social care system is broken in this country. It really is. I mean, I've seen it myself personally. But again, we've got to make sure that the economy is stable enough to ensure that we can pay for...
But the reason it isn't stable is because of political choices and decisions that have been made by your government. And you've had 12 years to sort out social care.
And I completely take the point that, you know, we're in a global problems at the moment. However, rightly or wrongly, all these things, if they come to pass, the public politically are going to blame that mini budget because that's the thing that's going to stick in people's minds.
And you've got Liz Truss's approval ratings now worse than Prince Andrew's.
Yes.
It doesn't get much worse than that, does it?
I mean, how long do you think Tory MPs will give Liz Truss?
Well, I'm astonished that she's still there,
Are
frankly. I expect her to be gone very, very quickly.
Well, she's just got into the car, leaving number 10 Downing Street, making that short journey to the Houses of Parliament, the Palace of Westminster, because she will be standing up in 20 minutes' time to face not just Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, but also her own backbenchers. As Iain Dale just said, she wasn't there for the urgent question. Prime Ministers aren't always there for urgent questions put by the Labour Party. That was Penny Mordaunt, Leader of the House of Commons, but she was there, of course, for the statement from Jeremy Hunt. Let's talk about strikes, because we are expecting more strikes. More dates have been set over pay and conditions. These are rail strikes on the 3rd, 5th and 7th of November, announced by the RMT yesterday. It's not just rail strikes, though. Unions are warning of mass walkouts in all sorts of areas. This is the headline in The Times. Bring it on. TUC leader Francis O'Grady lines up coordinated wave of winter strikes. During the leadership campaign, I hate to keep pressing the bruise, Nickie Aiken, but Liz Truss pledged to bring forward legislation to crack down on strikes within 30 days of taking office. Well, today is the 44th day of Liz Truss in her leadership role. Where is that legislation?
I believe it's coming. Seriously, I believe it's going to be coming in the next few days. But I think she's promised in the first 30 days. But let's remember that we did have the death of our sovereign and things were put on hold. So I think we have to give the government the fact. But I think it's really, really important that we do introduce legislation that prevents the trade unions from just choosing to strike when pay negotiations haven't even finished. The only people who are really feeling the pain are commuters, people trying to get to their jobs, children trying to get to school, people trying to get to college. Those are the people who are paying the price for the unions' stranglehold on the situation.
But these people are also suffering from 10.1% of inflation, aren't they? And the cost of living is hitting hard. Is this the right time? And we have to take your word that the legislation is coming. We have had a discussion about whether we can believe everything Liz Truss said.
I'm told, Joe, so...
that it's coming in the next few days. Would you welcome it, Kim?
Yeah, look, I mean, at the end of the day, people are not striking for a laugh. They're not striking because they've got nothing better to do. They are striking because they are desperate. I've got lots of friends who teach. I've got lots of friends who are nurses. They are literally working within a broken system because of 12 years of mismanagement of the economy and of our public services. We've got, you know, ex-army personnel being offered grants by the British Legion because they're struggling so much. You know, I had a meeting last week in my constituency with some local primary school head teachers. We didn't actually talk about education at all. We talked about the fact that they're having to help families with food and heating. We talked about the fact that there's a mental health crisis amongst our young people. That, you know, we can't even have teachers teaching because they're doing so much else around that, around pastorally looking after their children and their communities. Nurses are just broken because of the pandemic, and we're not doing anything to help them.
Right, so do you back a wave of winter strikes then? Bring it on, says Francis O'Grady.
Listen, no one strikes because it's...
But that's not the question I asked. Do you support what Francis O'Grady has said?
I think you've got to support people's right to strike, but also what you've got to do as the opposition is put pressure on the government to have conversations and get around the table and help the people as best they possibly can.
Iain?
I'm tempted to turn into Mick Lynch at this point because apparently I am his looky-likey. Which I think,
no comment.
Which I think he does like more than I do. But anyway, look, obviously everyone has a right to strike. The government hasn't sought to abolish that. Whether there is a case for new legislation, I don't think that case has been fully made. They haven't laid the ground for this, just as they didn't for the mini-budget. And I think, look, people are getting frustrated. But I know from people who call into my radio show on the RMT and ASLEF strikes, they actually enjoy a much bigger degree of support from the general public than any other strikes in the past. And I think that ought to be worrying for the government, because I think there will be people who say, well, this is a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
I completely agree. And in this country, there are less rights in many ways for people to take industrial action. And I think we need to stop talking about unions this and unions that. It's people, and it's vast swathes of people, of your voters, of your voters, who are feeling so struggling at the moment. They just feel compelled to take action. And as you say, everywhere I go, I meet people who are really supportive of what the RMT is doing, ASLEF and elsewhere, and actually a lot of people who would love to be taking action themselves if they were unionised, because across the country people are feeling so pressured.
What sort of pay offers should be made? 10%?
Look, again, we need to look at it in the round up. We look at all the evidence in front of us.
Kim, you don't need to look at the evidence on this. They want an inflation level or inflation busting pay rise. Most of the workers who are either proposing to go on strike or who are going on strike.
The government isn't the paymaster here.
No.
It's a private sector.
But what would you like to see? What would you support?
Well, we need to be looking up to the region of 10%, don't we? That's what we need to be saying to people. But I understand it's very, very difficult. But the other reason this is so important is because we've got teachers leaving the profession, we've got nurses leaving the profession, we've got a serious workforce issue already. So we have to be giving them a price rise that reflects inflation or thereabouts as best we can, given the figures that we'll have in front of us, because we're going to have more and more problems down the line for our schools and for our hospitals and for the NHS generally if people keep leaving the profession because they're not able to survive on the wages that they're being paid.
Make the case for this legislation, Nickie.
Well, I was going to talk about just come back on what Kim said about the pay rises. You know, there is an independent review system here,
guided by what the government says.
Absolutely, but the government the government I know has accepted the recommendations for nurses' pay, and that is an independent decision. And I do think government should keep out of this and allow independent experts to make the recommendations. So, look. Public sector workers are really feeling the inflation. So are private sector workers. We are all feeling this. Inflation does bite into our wages. And, you know, I do not see the argument for putting on more strikes, stopping people getting to work and really, really having a damaging effect on our economy when we should be growing our economy. So every strike day causes us so much economic damage. In central London, which is the economic powerhouse of the country, you know, you see it on every strike day. People are staying away. So the cafes and the bars and the restaurants and the barbers and the
do something about these ridiculous just oil strikers who are damaging the economy by what they do.
Well, we did that last night through the public order bill that went through.
And we're going to talk about it in just a moment. I think we're going to just dip into the chamber since we've got just under 15 minutes to go until Prime Minister's questions. There we go. It is starting to fill up. MPs will obviously be keen to hear from the Prime Minister and the questions being posed by Keir Starmer. Let's return to the issue of these strikes. You won't support the legislation if and when it is brought.
No, I don't believe we are supporting the legislation when it's brought through. Just a quick one. The other thing that really annoys me about this is the teachers that were given a recent pay rise, the schools had to find that money themselves. So when I met with head teachers recently, this is the thing that I think the public probably aren't aware of, they were given a 3% pay rise, I think it was, and they had to find that money from their own budget. So the government aren't giving them any more money to fund the small pay rises that they're getting already. So they've now got to decide, do we get rid of a member of staff to keep the rest of our staff? What do we give up on? Do we give up on after-school clubs? Do we give up on school trips? You know, so these really difficult decisions.
Well, let me ask you, what is it that you oppose specifically in the legislation? Minimum service requirement if there are critical workers actually out on strike, 50% of the workforce being balloted, and a pay offer being presented before any ballot can take place.
I'm not over the details of the legislation, Joe, to be honest.
So you don't necessarily disagree with the parts of the legislation being put forward when it comes?
I'd have to look at it in more detail.
But you're going to oppose it anyway. I mean, there's.
Yeah, I think probably the fair answer is that I would have to look at it in more detail when it comes through.
I mean, isn't that a problem? Most people would say, well, what's wrong with those things?
I don't on the 50% of balloting the workforce. I don't know that people would actually, because I think it's already very difficult to go from a position where you sort of first put out the idea that you want to take industrial action to you actually get people out. That is a very long, slow process. You have to give more than 2 weeks' notice to the employer. There's lots and lots of little hoops you have to go through, and it's just putting more and more obstacles in the way of workers being able to voice their absolute rights.
Iain?
I think the minimum service requirement is legitimate, because particularly on essential services, and I think trains do count as essential services, so I'm not against that. The 50% thing, I think, again, that's a rod for their own backs, because, of course, very few governments are ever elected on 50% of the actual electorate, are they? So I'm not sure about that one.
All right, well, you raised the issue of a different kind of protester. Let's have a listen to the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She was in the Commons yesterday, speaking during the debate on the public order bill. It passed with Conservative and Independent support. Let's have a listen.
It's the Labour Party, it's the Lib Dems, it's the coalition of chaos, it's the Guardian reading, tofu eating, wokerati, dare I say, the anti-growth coalition that we have to thank for the disruption that we are seeing on our roads today.
What did you think when you heard Suella Braverman speaking like that?
It's not language I would use, Joe. I think that the people who are demonstrating pouring milk in M&S are actually being counterproductive when it comes to persuading people that we have a climate change emergency. You know, we have come so far in this country to persuade people that there is a serious issue with climate change, and you know we are changing people's views on it. We are changing people's habits, and when you see people using basically criminal damage to persuade people to change their minds, that it's not going to work. And I think that these people really need to have a really deep thought about what they are actually trying to achieve, because at the moment they are turning people off.
Well, let's speak to one of them, Robert Gordon, spokesperson for the protest group Animal Rebellion. You weren't actually at the protest. We're going to show some pictures, Robert, of some of your colleagues in the group pouring milk away in Edinburgh, in London, in supermarkets like Marks and Spencer's and Waitrose, and also Fortnum and Mason. We're seeing those pictures now. Robert, perhaps you can answer what Nickie was saying about your actions.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. Good morning, Joe. Thank you for having me on to talk about this really critical conversation. I think it's important to remember that we do this because we care really deeply about our families, our livelihoods, and our environment. These are the same reasons that millions of people are standing up to a system and government that have failed them, like the rail workers, barristers, and other strikers who will be soon joined by nurses and teachers this winter in strike action, and like the RSPB and National Trust, who are calling on their millions of supporters to take to the streets in opposition to this government's attack on nature.
All right.
So well, 99% have had enough.
Right.
And we are simultaneously all gone.
And you think it's justified by pouring milk, which we've just been seeing. Iain, what do you say, having seen those pictures?
Well, it's pathetic, isn't it? I mean, he makes out some sort of green person who cares for the planet. That's what he's supposed to be. And yet he's fully in favour of these sorts of actions, which, I mean, who do you think actually clears up the milk after it's poured away? Answer me that.
Robert?
Look, we're doing what is necessary to achieve change. And I acknowledge 100% that when we take this kind of action, there is disruption and inconvenience, and I apologise sincerely.
Well, maybe if your people actually stayed behind and cleaned it up, that might be something. You disgust me.
We have to look at the bigger picture, and that is that we are in a cost of living and climate and ecological crisis, and the government aren't acting on that.
Kim?
Look, I just don't think this is a remotely helpful way to protest at all. I mean, I support peaceful protest. I support people's right to protest. I think this is incredibly unhelpful. I think it's disrespectful. As Iain says, who's got to clean up that mess after you've gone? You know, there's different ways to make your point, and we all know that we've got a climate emergency, but this is just not helpful, and I think it's... Can
I come back as well? Sorry, Kim, but also, you know, you talk about a cost of living crisis. Well, the amount of money that local councils have to spend clearing up the mess, the amount of numbers of police officers who have to deal with this when they should be on the streets fighting crime, and they're having to deal with a bunch of basically spoilt people who think that you know, anarchy is the best way forward, and all you are doing is turning people off your debate.
Well, let me get Robert to respond to that directly, because you're being described in a way that I'm sure you're not comfortable with, but how do you defend your actions? Particularly, you're not winning over anyone on the panel here.
Well, like I said, we're doing what history shows is necessary to achieve change. You know, these kind of tactics are how women in this country got
don't liken yourself to suffragettes, mate.
No way.
Are you going to let me please
go on, Robert,
finish. Invite me on. So this wouldn't be happening if the government were taking, you know, the common sense, science-backed solutions to these crises. We should stop looking at what these activists are doing and more be asking ourselves why. Why are ordinary people stepping up and taking this action? And it's because the 99% have had enough.
Right.
We're going through a summer where, you know, we saw record-shattering temperatures, where 60 homes and businesses burnt to the ground, into a winter where people aren't going to be able to afford their homes and heat their food because of unaffordable.
The thing is, Robert, what people will say is, are you not, your actions, just distracting from the core issues that you have just outlined for people? People are discussing your tactics rather than the important issue of climate change. Alison?
I was going to say, we are discussing climate change on this programme, which we wouldn't necessarily be discussing anyway.
We're not, actually.
Well, but I mean, it's got airtime, which it hasn't got. I mean, there's plenty. What they did was criminal damage. That's breaking the law. Those people are being arrested. That's fine. Those opportunities are there. And I guess those people pour milk in Marks and Spencer's in Norwich, knowing that was a risk. Fine, but it is getting attention. And maybe we, as a society, we have to think, if people are so frustrated that they're driven to doing this sort of things, maybe we need more avenues for these people to be able to talk about how they feel.
Iain?
Well, they're going to get fewer opportunities to talk about how they feel, because I'm not going to give this guy any publicity on my show. I'm fed up with these people who think that they can disrupt the country. Fine, have the argument.
But do you think that about all protesters when it comes to those locking on, when it comes to those gluing themselves to the roads?
When Extinction Rebellion started, I thought they were rather refreshing in the way that they were doing it. I thought they were persuading people to their cause, and then they got taken over by the usual sort of suspects in these things, and they've become a fringe group now who do things that don't convert anybody to their cause. And I'm sorry, the media, I'm not criticising you, but the media collectively falls into their trap too often by giving them the oxygen of publicity.
Robert, final word to you.
Yeah, we're not doing this for publicity. We're doing this
well,
for...
you are doing it for publicity, but yes, carry on.
And instead of opting for more crackdowns that wouldn't be out of place in Putin's Russia, we should be listening to those people who are standing up and saying no, and talking about the solutions. That's what we should be here talking about.
And I will happily do that with people who don't do the sort of things that you lot are doing.
Robert Gordon, thank you very much. That's Robert Gordon from Animal Rebellion. But on this issue, why didn't you support the Public Order Bill? You were pretty disappointed in the action taken there, and the Public Order Bill would help stop it.
Because we've got to give people the right to protest. It's just how that protest is done, isn't it? We've got to give people the right to protest and express themselves.
There's plenty of ways of dealing with people who are protesting illegally already. There's plenty of things. What they did in Marks and Spencer's was illegal. Arrest them, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the trouble is they're arrested and then nothing else happens. I mean, this is where Suella Braverman, I mean, she talks tough, but, OK, she's only been in office for 6 weeks, but that kind of divisive language...
It was appalling.
It was appalling.
I was embarrassed
and I never thought
I
would hanker for Priti Patel.
Oh, well, on that, Nickie, I don't know if you're hankering for Priti Patel, but what did you make of what Suella Braverman did say? You said you wouldn't use that sort of language. Is it because the government is struggling so much on the economy, so much when it comes to financial issues, that it is going for the sort of inflammatory language as seen by both Iain and Alison here in opposition, really, to what's being discussed?
I think the Home Secretary was frustrated that the Labour Party wouldn't support the Public Order Bill when, you know, we have people gluing themselves to roads, stopping people from getting about their daily lives, stopping emergency vehicles getting to sick and dying people, and just bringing parts of central London and other places to a standstill. It's just ridiculous. And we do need to keep up with modern day protests. Look, I believe fully in the right to protest. I've been on protest myself. But, you know, there are new modern ways that people use to demonstrate their anger at certain things, and you can't have people gluing themselves to roads and stopping central London.
She took that situation and she used it as yet more ammunition in the culture war that she wants to rage in this country, so that rather than actually trying to find solutions to these problems, everyone just pitches against each other, and I thought it was disgusting behaviour.
Iain, do you agree? Is that what it is about the culture war?
Well, there are politicians who seem to want to promote division rather than bring people together. I thought the whole idea of this anti-growth coalition was just preposterous. I mean, who is, apart from the likes of the previous guest there, who is against growth? Everybody is in favour of growth. So what you're doing is creating an artificial dividing line, and that is not where we need to be in our modern day politics.
Let's take viewers into the chamber. As you can see, it is almost full. This is ahead of Liz Truss. There she is, sitting next to her new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, sharing a joke there, before she has to answer questions from Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. It's only her third appearance at Prime Minister's questions, but then she's only been Prime Minister, I think I said, for 44 days. The pressure will be on. What do you think the atmosphere is going to be like?
It's going to be electric, rather like 100 years ago today, when the Conservative Parliamentary Party met at the Carlton Club to depose David Lloyd George as Prime Minister, exactly a century to go, as outlined in my new book, Jo.
Oh, you got it in there in the end. What do you think? I mean, what about the pressure on Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, this is his moment. I mean, quite how quickly he actually wants Liz Truss to go, because every day that she stays in office is another day we're closer to electoral oblivion, really, for the Conservative Party.
And what do you think he needs to do?
One thing I do think he perhaps needs to do is... I wouldn't go too hard on her if I was him, because I almost feel it's quite uncomfortable to watch now. I just think she's almost like a wounded animal, and I never thought I'd say this, but I actually feel some sense of pity for her. Now, I'm sure a Conservative Prime Minister doesn't want the editor of the Daily Mirror feeling pity, but that's sort of where I think
It's not a good place to be for any politician, to have people feeling sorry for them.
I have to say, I felt like on a human level, I was finding myself feeling sympathetic, but then when I see them laughing like that, they obviously didn't watch the BBC 2 hours this morning with people who are...
And that's where
crying.
our pity really ought to be, with those people.
And what should Tory MPs be doing today, Nickie? Because they're the ones, of course, who will decide her fate.
Well, they'll be listening to the questions and to her answers. And at the moment, I'm sure that they are anticipating an interesting PMQ'S this afternoon.
You were about to say good performance, weren't you?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, were you? I thought you were. But, I mean, look, I don't see there is any way back for her. She could give, even if she gives the most brilliant performance today, I think most MPs have made up their minds.
Just pause for a moment in case this is the Speaker announcing Prime Minister's questions.
Watch on Parliament Live TV. We start Prime Minister's questions with Justin Matters.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the penny dropped for the Prime Minister on Monday and she realised that her budget was responsible for crashing the economy, she should have come to this House to explain herself and to apologise to the millions of people who will now be paying hundreds of pounds extra a month on their mortgages because of her mistakes. But now she's here, can she tell us, given the absolute chaos her government has created, why the Chancellor lost his job but she kept hers?
Mr. Speaker, I have been very clear that I am sorry and that I have made mistakes. But the right thing to do in those circumstances is to make changes, which I've made, and to get on with the job and deliver for the British people. And Mr. Speaker, we've delivered the energy price guarantee, we've helped people this winter, and I will continue to do that.
Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that local people and local councils are best placed to decide how many houses they need and where those houses should go? And if she does, will she end the top-down approach to housing targets and reduce or preferably remove the powers of the planning inspectorate?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We will abolish the top-down housing targets. We want decisions about homes, about infrastructure, driven by local people, not driven by Whitehall. And that's why we're setting up new, locally driven investment zones.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A book is being written about the Prime Minister's time in office. Apparently, it's going to be out by Christmas. Is that the release date or the title?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have been in office for just under 2 months, and I have delivered the energy price guarantee, making sure that people aren't paying £6,000 bills this winter. I've reversed the national insurance increase, and I've also taken steps, and we will be taking steps, to crack down on the militant unions. Now, what, Mr. Speaker, I think, Mr. Speaker, that is more of a record of action than the honourable gentleman in his 2.5 years in the job.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister ignored every question put to her. Instead, she repeatedly criticised Labour's plan for a 6-month freeze on energy bills. This week, the Chancellor made it her policy. How can she be held to account when she's not in charge?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our policy is to protect the most vulnerable for 2 years. But I had to take the decision, because of the economic situation, to adjust our policies. I am somebody who's prepared to front up. I'm prepared to take the tough decisions. Unlike the honourable gentleman, who hasn't done anything on businesses, he's done nothing to say he'll protect people after 1 year. He's got no plan.
Here's Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister stood there and promised absolutely no spending reductions. They all cheered. This week, the Chancellor announced a new wave of cuts. What's the point of a Prime Minister whose promises don't even last a week?
Prime Minister.
Well, I can assure the right honourable gentleman that spending will go up next year and it will go up the year after. But of course, we need to get value for taxpayers' money. The Labour Party has pledged hundreds of billions of spending pledges, none of which they've retracted. The honourable gentleman needs to reflect the economic reality in his policies.
Mr. Speaker, those spending cuts are on the table for one reason and one reason only, because they crashed the economy. And working people are going to have to pay 500 quid more a month on their mortgages. And what's the Prime Minister's response? To say she's sorry. What does she think people will think and say? That's all right, I don't mind financial ruin. At least she apologised.
Prime Minister.
I do think there has to be some reflection of economic reality from the party opposite. The fact is that interest rates are rising across the world and the economic conditions have worsened. And we are being honest. We're levelling with the public, unlike the honourable gentleman who simply won't do it. And what is the honourable gentleman doing about the fact that train workers are again going on strike? The fact is he refuses to condemn the workers. We are bringing forward policies. Mr. Speaker, we are bringing forward policies that are going to make sure our railways are protected, people going to work are protected. He backs the strikers, we back the strivers.
Mr. Speaker, she's asking me questions because we're a government in waiting and they're an opposition in waiting. There's no getting away from this. Millions of people are facing horrendous mortgage repayments, and she's admitted it's her fault. She shouldn't have conducted an economic experiment on the British public. But it's not just her. They put her there. They're keeping her there. Why on earth would anyone trust the Tories with the economy ever again?
Well, I notice, Mr. Speaker, he's not actually objecting to a single economic policy that the Chancellor announced on Monday. He's refusing to condemn the strikers. We're on the side of working people. We're going to legislate to make sure we keep our railways open. The honourable gentleman refuses to do anything.
Here's Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the only mandate she's ever had is from members opposite. It was a mandate built on fantasy economics and it ended in disaster. The country's got nothing to show for it except the destruction of the economy and the implosion of the Tory party. I've got the list here. 45p tax cut, gone. Corporation tax cut, gone. 20p tax cut, gone. 2-year energy freeze, gone. Tax-free shopping, gone. Economic credibility, gone. and her supposed best friend, the former Chancellor, he's gone as well. They're all gone. So why is she still here?
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter. I have acted in the national interest to make sure that we have economic stability.
Prime Minister. Order. Order. I'm going to hear the Prime Minister. I suggest that all members need to hear the answer. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter. We have delivered on the energy price guarantee. We've delivered on the energy price guarantee. We've delivered on national insurance. We are going to deliver to stop the militant trade unions disrupting our railways. The honourable gentleman has no idea, he has no plan, and he has no alternative.
James Grundy. Just sit down. Sit. Can I just say, it's obviously the more popular choice. Come on, James Grundy. You've got a future.
Lee Centurion's rugby league team on their recent promotion to Super League, bringing millions to the local economy, and furthermore, would she also guarantee that our excellent women's Euros team, including Ella Toon from my constituency, Tyldesley, will receive the number 10 reception that they so deserve?
Prime Minister.
Well, I join my honourable friend in congratulating the Lee Centurions on their return to the Super League. I had the huge privilege of meeting the Lionesses last week, a fantastic team who won a major tournament for us. We will host the Downing Street reception as soon as their training programme makes them available.
I look forward to Rugby League invite as well. Let's now come to the leader of the SNP, Iain Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 10 U-turns in 2 weeks, we're left with a Prime Minister in office, but not in power. And families are paying through the teeth for her mistakes. Her latest broken promise has put pensioners in the front line of Tory cuts. So, can the Prime Minister perhaps turn to her Chancellor right now, get permission to make another U-turn, and commit to raising the state pension at the rate of inflation?
Prime Minister.
I honestly don't know what the honourable gentleman is talking about, because we have been clear in our manifesto that we will maintain the triple lock, and I am completely committed to it. So is the Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's no surprising that the Prime Minister's approval ratings are collapsing with an answer like that. The worst polling result for any Prime Minister in history. She's just thrown 12 million pensioners under the Tory bus. And it's not just pensioners feeling the pain. In the last week alone...
I also want to hear Mr. Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, it's not just pensioners feeling the pain. In the last week alone, inflation has risen to a 40-year high. Mortgage rates are at the highest level since the financial crash. And people's energy bills are about to rise to more than £5,000. Can the Prime Minister answer one simple question? Why does she expect everyone else to pay the price for her failure?
Prime Minister.
I don't think the honourable gentleman can take yes for an answer. I've been clear we are protecting the triple lock on pensions. And if the honourable gentleman is concerned about the economy, why does he continue to advocate for separatism, which would plunge the Scottish economy into chaos?
Gary Sambrook.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Over the last couple of years, thousands of homes have been proposed or built in Birmingham Northfield constituency, which puts a huge strain on GP and dentist appointments. Would my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, agree with me that more needs to be done in the planning process to make sure that when we have large-scale developments, we have more capacity in those vital services?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. When we build new houses, we need to make sure there are GP surgeries, schools, infrastructure, and that's why we're introducing a new infrastructure levy to make sure more of the money from developers goes on supporting local communities.
Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, millions of family carers have been forced to cut back on food and heating. One told Carers UK, "My son is incontinent. If we don't wash him in warm water several times a day, this will cause him to physically decline." So how do we pay for the gas to heat the water if we are currently at max budget? Vulnerable people and carers are struggling enough already in this cost of living crisis, Mr. Speaker. So will the Prime Minister guarantee that support for the vulnerable, including carers allowance, will rise by at least today's inflation rate of 10.1%?
Prime Minister.
People are struggling. It is difficult at the moment. That's why we put in place the energy price guarantee to make sure the typical household isn't paying more than £2,500. It's why we've supplied an extra £1,200 of support to the most vulnerable. And I can assure the right honourable gentleman we will always support the most vulnerable. They will be our priority.
Kay Jones.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Brecon and Radnorshire has a proud military footprint. Not least the Cambrian Patrol exercise, which I visited last week. It is considered the Olympic gold medal in infantry training, attracting teams from across the world to compete in a 60-kilometre march over 2 days in the Brecon Beacons. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating all those who took part, not least the team of Gurkha soldiers from the Infantry Battle School in Brecon who took home a coveted gold medal, further cementing Brecon's special place in the UK Armed Forces?
I join my honourable friend in thanking everybody at Brecon Barracks who organises the exercise Cambrian Patrol each year. It is a world-class training exercise, and I congratulate Brecon's Gurkha soldiers for their fantastic achievement of a gold medal. Well done.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It took just 5 working days for the Prime Minister to crash the pound, damage pension funds and send people's mortgage costs spiralling. Her new Chancellor may have reversed almost all of her policies, but the damage has been done, and we now face yet another round of Tory cuts and austerity. So I'd like to ask the Prime Minister and those sitting behind her, why is she still at the dispatch box, and when will voters get their say on this disastrous government?
Prime Minister.
We are facing very, very difficult economic times. I took the decision I had to in the interest of economic stability. And what is important is we work together, including with the SNP, to get through this winter and grow the economy.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is to be commended for securing the passage of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill through this House without amendment before the summer recess. Can she confirm that it's the government's intention that the bill should remain unamended, and in particular that the European Court of Justice should have no jurisdiction in any part of the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
I am completely committed to the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. It deals with the very specific issues we face in Northern Ireland, the free flow of trade, and also making sure that the people of Northern Ireland are able to benefit from being part of the United Kingdom. And I can tell my honourable friend that any negotiations will reflect the same position that is in the Protocol Bill.
Dame Ben-Hillier.
Mr. Speaker, we understand that this afternoon's vote on fracking is deemed a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. Can she give us any reason why her own backbenchers or anyone in this country can have confidence in her after her policies have caused chaos in the markets and wrecked the economy?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do face very difficult economic times. I have been honest about the mistakes I have made. But what I don't apologise for is the fact that we have helped households through this winter, through the energy price guarantee, the fact that we've reversed the national insurance rise, and the fact we are taking action to get our railways running rather than being disrupted by the militant trade unions she supports.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a number of low points recently, including the Republic of Ireland's football team singing pro-IRA songs in the changing room. We should never forget the sacrifice of those who paid the price to maintain the peace during the Troubles. Closer to home, recent events meant that spending is going to be more constrained than originally thought. May I encourage the Prime Minister to ensure that we retain compassion in politics in these decisions, including maintaining the link between benefits and inflation? Will she do that?
Prime Minister.
We are compassionate Conservatives. We will always work to protect the most vulnerable, and that is what we did with the energy price guarantee. We are going to make sure the most vulnerable are protected into year 2, and I'm sure the Chancellor has heard my honourable friend's representations on the contents of the medium-term fiscal plan.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like the public at large, I've supported the government in terms of the actions it has taken to support Ukraine, not least because of what's at stake there. But right now, in order to maintain that support, as the public deals with rising prices, inflation, mortgage costs and much else, Ukraine fatigue is a real and present danger. And I'm afraid to say to the Prime Minister, she is now an active driver against that public support that has so unified many of us, that has so unified many of us to do what needs to be done. So in a time where resolve in support of Ukraine needs to be steeled, will she make sure that she commits from the dispatch box that the economic and military and political support won't be another casualty under this Prime Minister?
It was one of my first acts in office to make sure the military support we give to Ukraine is equal to the military support we gave this year. We must make sure Ukraine win. They can win, they will win, and they must win.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Prime Minister for sticking by her words and giving communities in Fylde the final say on fracking. But as always, the devil is in the detail. Can the Prime Minister assure me that local consent will be measured independently and transparently, and under no circumstances will fracking companies be directly engaged in assessing local consent? And if people in Fylde say no, that view and that decision will be respected and acted upon by this government?
Well, I very strongly agree with my honourable friend. I know this is something he cares deeply about. I can assure him that we will consult on the robust system of local consent, give clear advice on seismic limits and safety before any fracking takes place. And the consultation will consider all of the relevant people, the regional mayors, the local authorities and parishes, as well as the concerns of those directly affected. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will be saying more about this later today.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privatisation does not work. It doesn't work for our NHS. We have another Amber Alert in the NHS Blood Service, a service that this week's Chancellor sold when he was Health Secretary. And it doesn't work for our postal service, with Royal Mail Group taking £758 million in profit last year, yet our universal service obligation is at risk. Workers' pay conditions and 10,000 jobs are at threat. Will the Prime Minister continue to let obscene amounts of profit be made while services are cut and stamp prices rise, or will she launch an inquiry into the gross mismanagement of Royal Mail?
Prime Minister.
What we need is an efficient postal service that delivers for people across this country, and that's what I'm focused on, not making ideological points.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was in business, it was a real privilege to employ very many talented, bright young people. I always found that when you believed in somebody, when you gave them the opportunity, they went on to thrive in their career. That's why tomorrow, in North Norfolk, I'll be launching my new scheme, the 100 Apprenticeship Challenge, to drive 100 new apprenticeships all over a rural constituency. Would the Prime Minister please thank not just my DWP office and Julia Nix, who's been fantastic, the district councils, the county councils, and an awful lot of stakeholders who worked for over 6 months to deliver this fantastic scheme to drive growth and jobs for young people across my constituency.
Well, I do want to thank Julia and her team for the fantastic job they're doing, and also you as the local member of, my right honourable friend as the local member of Parliament. Apprenticeships are a fantastic way for people to learn and gain experience, and I'm proud that we've created 5.1 million apprenticeships since 2010.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff is in hot water after lobbying on behalf of a Libyan warlord and big tobacco. It turns out he's also lobbied for PPE giants Sante Global. Is it wise to have a lobbyist at the centre of Downing Street?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all appointments in Downing Street are properly checked through the propriety and ethics process, and that is the way that we do it in a completely impartial way.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When my right honourable friend was Foreign Secretary, I know that she was acutely aware of the importance of British soft power acting in our national interest. Will she confirm today the promise we both made in 2010 when this government first came into office, that she will not balance the books on the backs of the poorest people in the world?
Minister.
Well, can I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for the fantastic work he did as International Development Secretary, and I am proud that we have rebalanced our international development budget to focus more on humanitarian aid and more on women and girls, and no doubt more details will be set out in due course.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last Tory Prime Minister was forced out after a series of dodgy dealings and failing to take responsibility for any of it. So what's this Prime Minister getting the boot for? Her plan that crashed the economy, forcing fracking on communities who don't want it, or will she do the decent thing and go and call a general election?
I have taken responsibility and I have made the right decision in the interest of the country's economic stability.
Steve Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every single member in this House will have constituents waiting for treatment within the COVID backlog. The Health Secretary's priorities are absolutely right, including her B for tackling the backlogs. Can the Prime Minister reassure me that the government is committed to the series of elective hubs that we've promised, including at the Royal Hampshire County Hospital in my Winchester constituency?
Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has set out her plans to deliver on dealing with the COVID backlog, and she will continue to work on that and make sure we deal with what was a massive pandemic, creating a backlog. We will deal with it.
Bernie Gardner.
Since the mini-budget, thousands of my constituents have been in mental anguish and despair. I recognise that the Honourable Lady has faced a week of mental anguish and despair herself. She has had people angry with her, she's had people who have mocked her. But having had that experience, what will she now do to improve the healthcare, the mental health care for people in this country, so that the anguish that they face in the coming months is properly responded to and dealt with?
My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has set out a very clear plan of how we're going to deal with the backlog created by COVID, how we're going to make sure people get timely GP appointments, and how we're going to improve on the services in our hospitals, including mental health services.
Waitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is facing tough choices, but people living with dementia face unlimited care costs, and that is not a choice. Can my right honourable friend assure me that she is committed to social care reform to end that worry and relieve pressure on the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Yes, we are committed to social care reform. We do need to deal with those issues.
Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always better to see a Prime Minister at her desk rather than underneath it. And now that she's here, I wonder if she could tell us why next week this House will be discussing legislation that will abolish vital protections on pension payouts. It will abolish our right to watch the Olympics free of charge and airline consumer laws. How is any of the retained law bill in the British interest?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think we have yet another example of somebody who doesn't want to support the British public's decision to leave the European Union in 2016. Isn't it quite incredible, Mr. Speaker, that 6 years after people voted to leave the European Union, there are people who object to taking EU law off our statute books. Now, I'm a Democrat. I respect what British people voted for. I suggest the right honourable lady does the same.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, 30 years ago, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy was created out of the war in Bosnia so that democracies could flourish and freedom and prosperity come with it. This evening, in your rooms, we celebrate that anniversary by hearing directly from our country representative in Ukraine, from the chair of the Taiwanese Foreign Affairs Committee and the leader of the opposition in Uganda, a good example of the range of contacts that this great cross-party body funded by government is working with. Can I ask the Prime Minister if she agrees that this is a vital contribution by our government and our people to democracy around the world, and will she encourage members around the House to join us this evening?
Prime Minister.
Well, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy does a fantastic job, and I think we know from what has happened in Ukraine, the appalling war perpetrated by Vladimir Putin, just how precious democracy is and how much we need to do to work with our friends and allies to protect democracy around the world. And I do encourage colleagues from all sides of the House to attend the event tonight.
That now completes Prime Minister's questions. I'll let the House clear.
Well, that brings us to the end of this much anticipated Prime Minister's questions, the third for Liz Truss. I want to welcome my guests for this part of the programme: Steve Baker, Northern Ireland Minister; Lisa Nandy, Shadow Levelling Up Secretary for Labour; and our Chief Political Correspondent, Nick Eardley. Well, it was painful at times, but Liz Truss got through it. She said, "I'm a fighter and not a quitter." But Keir Starmer certainly pressed his advantage by saying that she is not in charge, no doubt looking at Jeremy Hunt, the newly appointed Chancellor, who reversed pretty much every part of the tax-cutting elements of the mini-budget from several weeks ago. He also said that Labour is a government in waiting and the Tories are an opposition in waiting. The big news that was announced by Liz Truss after we discussed it on the programme this morning, it's across most of the front pages of the newspapers here, the turmoil and uncertainty around whether or not pensions would be uprated, increase the state pension in line with inflation, because it is the highest of the three measures that the triple lock, what we call the triple lock, is being used. She said it would. They will stick to the manifesto commitment, the Tory manifesto commitment, to keep the triple lock. Let's get a response, first of all, from you. How would you sum up Liz Truss's performance?
Well, look, I think there was two possibilities from PMQs today. One would be that it was a disaster and it would hasten Tory MPs saying that Liz Truss needs to go. It didn't feel like that. It felt like it was probably a performance that buys her a bit of time. Coming out fighting is designed to reassure Tory MPs that she still has something to give, but that's very different from it being the crisis over. I don't think it means that we can calculate anything other than Liz Truss lives to fight another afternoon.
Can she survive, Steve Baker?
Yes, she can, of course.
What, in the long term?
Yes, and of course the thing is, it's up to her whether she stays or goes. There's no mechanism for colleagues to remove the Prime Minister.
Is that what you got from her saying, I'm a fighter, not a quitter? She won't go easily.
It's not she's a fighter. She's going to... Of course, the fundamental thing is, Liz is right, that this country needs to go for growth. If people look at the OBR's Fiscal Sustainability Report or the National Audit Office audit of the National Insurance Fund, they'll see that we've got to go for growth if we're going to be paying pensions and healthcare.
So do you regret Jeremy Hunt's statement, then, reversing all those tax-cutting measures?
The Prime Minister's been very clear. She went too hard, too fast, and she's apologised. And Jeremy has put that right. But remember, we haven't repealed the change in the National Insurance levy.
Only because it had gone through Parliament. That was the impression we got from Jeremy Hunt.
The signal is there, and she's very clear. She's got a plan for growth. She wants this country to change direction, and we need to do it in a way which is going to be consistent with market stability. But that's where we're going, and
the question is who's in charge, isn't it? That's the overriding question. Is it Liz Truss or is it Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor? Now, we only just heard from Jeremy Hunt that everything is on the table when it comes to his statement on October the 31st. Hence, all of the uncertainty around the pensions triple lock. She said today, you're going to keep it, but he wasn't sure. Who should we believe?
Well, she is the Prime Minister, and she has said that at the dispatch box, at Prime Minister's questions. That is the policy.
Right. Can I remind you what she said last week? She said last week, in exactly the same place, at exactly the same time, there will be no spending cuts in response to Keir Starmer. We now know from Jeremy Hunt that there are going to be eye-wateringly difficult decisions. So I ask again, can we trust what she said on the triple lock?
I think this is one of those moments where we're getting tied up between nominal spending and real spending. I think what the Prime Minister's been very clear about is that in real terms, in nominal terms, spending is going to keep on increasing.
Yeah, but in cash terms. But we know that in real terms, because of inflation, it's not. So when she says there aren't going to be any spending cuts, and now we know that there will be, certainly in a couple of years' time, who should we believe?
Well, we should believe the Prime Minister, because she's been absolutely clear, cash terms, spending's going to increase. But
for 2 years.
But this is one of the crucial points. If you look down the road for 20 years, we have got a serious problem with age-related spending, and we're only going to solve it, and I'm optimistic that we can, if we go really boldly for growth, and that is what this country needs to do. Now, if there's been a problem made here, it's that the pitch hasn't been adequately rolled to explain to everyone that some rather dreary documents produced by official forecasters show that by about 2043-4, the National Insurance Fund will be exhausted and we will be starting to default on pensions unless we act now.
Right, well, before I come to you, Nick, the problem is the government has made the situation worse. Now, I don't say this. There are numerous people we can point to who have said that the government's mini-budget has actually made any tax rises or spending cuts that are necessary far, far worse. They've priced in what they call a risk premium, whether it's the Institute for Fiscal Studies or, let's listen to economist, formerly of the International Monetary Fund, we spoke to him yesterday, Mohammed El-Erian.
What she has done, unfortunately, is she has priced in a risk premium, a political risk premium that did not exist in the British markets beforehand. So as a result, it is very difficult to reset to where we were on September 22nd. And as a result, the average Brit is going to face higher mortgage rates, and the average company is going to face higher borrowing costs, which both deprive growth.
So the growth plan's gone, and it's gone because of what was announced in that mini-budget. That is what Mohammed El-Erian has said. He's right.
He didn't say the growth plan was gone, and we've got a lot of reform that we need to get on with to make sure this country keeps moving and keeps growing.
Do you accept that the mini-budget made it worse, has made the UK's economic situation far worse?
The Prime Minister herself has said it went too hard, too fast, and has apologised. But if I may just pick up on what he was saying there, Political risk is always an issue, and that's why...
But there was a risk premium that wasn't there before.
Big players in our economy, like the Governor of the Bank of England, like the Chancellor of the Exchequer, like the Prime Minister, all need to take action now to stabilise expectations and stabilise the economy. That's just what they're doing. It's the right thing to do. The alternative to that is my unrealistic colleagues thinking that somehow there's another way forward than stabilising the government and the situation. The only way to deal with these problems right now is for everybody to get behind this Prime Minister, help her to be a success, help see through her growth plan and help this country change gently course.
Should you say that officials in the Treasury admit that the cost of borrowing is such that they've had to figure in extra cuts as a result of the so-called growth plan 4 weeks ago? Can I just ask, the Prime Minister's now said that pensions will go up by the rate of inflation. Will benefits?
Well, this is something we're going to have to wait for on the 31st of October.
Why do we have to wait for that, but not pensions?
Forgive me, the announcement's just been made at PMQ'S. I'm a Northern Ireland Office Minister. Like everybody else, I need to wait for the Treasury.
Should?
I'm very, very clear, and it can be seen in my record as a backbencher, that we need to have a working safety net that catches people and off which they bounce. That's why my first act as I got into politics was to volunteer for the Centre for Social Justice. That's why I campaigned on the work allowance and the taper rate on universal credit, and indeed to keep the uplift. But the reality on all of these big numbers, as everyone on this panel knows, whether it's benefits or pensions, we're talking enormous sums. My goodness, look at what we've just had to do. To build a bridge to get through COVID, basically the Bank of England created all the money that was needed to be borrowed to create that bridge. I don't think people have even begun to understand how serious the economic situation is in the UK and everywhere in the world as interest rates rise. And if anyone thinks this problem can be solved by having forgive me, Lisa, but having a higher spending Labour government come in, they are kidding themselves. We have got to have a Conservative government that keeps things stable.
On that, a higher spending Labour government, it is true, isn't it? First of all, actually, do you welcome Liz Truss's commitment to the pensions triple lock?
Yeah, very much so. It was a commitment that the Tory party made in 2019 in their manifesto, and had they tried to dismantle that commitment, of course, we would have held them to account for that in the House of Commons. And
you also want benefits to rise in line with inflation too, at that 10.1%. We still don't have a commitment there from Steve Baker on that particular line. And just briefly, did you know the announcement was coming on the pensions triple lock?
Shortly before PMQs, I received a briefing in the usual way, and as a minister should, I kept that confidential.
Right, well, the accusation from Steve Baker is that a high-spending Labour government would make things worse. Now, it's true. We've looked at figures. If you win the next election, whenever it is, borrowing will still be in the region of about £100 billion. And you want to add to that with a commitment to spending borrowing, I say, £28 billion to fund your climate change strategy. How will it be paid for?
Well, look, we've said that we would borrow to invest, and the reason that we would do that in this particular instance is because if you don't, the costs of climate adaptation outstrip the amount that you spend up front. This is our plan for growth, that you get good jobs back into every community across this country. There is a global race on to create those jobs, and we will invest to bring them here so that ordinary people have money in their pockets, are spending in local businesses and on high streets. That's how you get growth. Right. There's no question, though, Joe, that people will be paying the price for what happened 2 weeks ago for a very long time to come. We won't have a magic wand in government, and we will be careful with every single penny of people's money. We won't make unfunded borrowing commitments. And why won't we do that? Because we've just seen what happens when you have a government that does. It crashes the economy. It leaves working people with £500 a month extra on their mortgages on average. This is something that this country just simply cannot afford anymore.
Do you think Labour was wrong then to support so much of Kwasi Kwarteng, the former Chancellor's announcements in the mini budget? Because you did support an awful lot of it.
No, look, we said we wouldn't oppose things like cutting taxes on working people, because you listen to Steve, you would think that this Tory government had just appeared out of nowhere. The truth is we need growth in the economy because we've had 12 years of low growth, and that's why we've got higher taxes on working people. But we have consistently called on the government from the moment that they announced the mini-budget to reverse that budget in full. And the reason for that is because you saw what happened. Yeah. Enormous instability in the markets, mortgage products withdrawn, people's dreams going up in smoke, and higher borrowing costs that mean that now we've got the appalling appalling spectacle of a Chancellor saying that we're going to make huge cuts to public services like the NHS as we go into winter with 1 million people on waiting lists and the health service on its knees.
So you are going to ask for the markets to trust you in the way that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng said, trust us with our plan for growth. There is nothing, Lisa, particularly in that £28 billion a year you want to spend on tackling climate change, that is going to inspire confidence in the markets apart from your word saying that it will pay for itself. That's what this government did. And look what happened. The markets were spooked.
Well, that's not the case, because we respect economic institutions and we will always publish an impact assessment and forecasts around our budgets, as governments have always done up until this government,
so it was about
to get confidence back into the market.
But it wasn't the policies you were against. Let's be clear. You did support the government's plan to cap average energy bills for 2 years, longer than your original plan. You supported the national insurance tax cut and the 1 penny cut in income tax. You thought that originally.
No, we
did support it.
We think it's absurd, the idea that you can cut taxes for the richest, that you can load the burden onto working people, that you can announce billions of pounds, tens of billions of pounds of unfunded borrowing commitments. You can gag the OBR and refuse to allow them to tell people what this is going to mean for the economy and then expect that to succeed. There isn't a serious economist in the country who thought that you could get growth by cutting taxes for the richest. We've got to get money into people's pockets, because it's only by empowering businesses, local leaders and communities across this country that we can get Britain working again.
But you did support unfunded borrowing.
No, we didn't.
You did support unfunded borrowing. You did support
the
cut in the penny tax.
I know it looks like we're in government at the moment, because frankly it doesn't look like they are.
You want to be.
This was not our mini budget. We opposed it in full, and we consistently called on the Tories to repeal it, because you saw what happened. It unleashed damage that people are going to pay for years and years to come.
Just to be clear, Keir Starmer said on the first day of Labour conference you would get rid of the 45p decision, but you would keep the decision to reduce income tax by a penny. That was part of what was junk, so you didn't oppose the whole thing at the start.
We said we wouldn't oppose it, but look, here's the thing. Liz Truss thinks she's going to soldier on till 2024. I'm not sure she'll soldier on beyond this afternoon, but if she does, and we get to that date when a general election is called, we are going to set out plans that meet the moment. We have no idea what we're going to inherit, and what we're not going to do is make unfunded borrowing commitments that load the damage and the cost onto working people for years and years to come. That's what they've done. We're not going to do it.
Why should anyone trust what this government says, whether it's Liz Truss or whether it's Jeremy Hunt, on the back of the risk premium that has been priced in, as institutions have said, because of that mini-budget? Let me just show you this headline in the Financial Times. The BT pension scheme suffers £11 billion hit in turmoil triggered by the mini-budget. We are still seeing the consequences of that mini-budget. Higher government borrowing costs at almost every time scale. The fact that the Bank of England has felt compelled to raise interest rates, perhaps faster and harder than otherwise if the mini-budget hadn't taken place, that's increased people's mortgages, people on fixed-term mortgages. The Bank of England stepped in to rescue the pensions industry because of the way it's regulated. Do you accept and do you want to apologise to people who are suffering as a result of your reckless mini-budget?
So the Prime Minister has accepted that the budget went too far, too fast, and she has apologised. But if I may, the point here, there's so much to disentangle in what you've just said. Disentangling the various effects of the Ukraine war, COVID and COVID lockdowns and restrictions.
Those, but what I'm saying is it's been made worse.
The Prime Minister's apologised, but if I may, the reason to trust the Prime Minister is that she is absolutely right on the fundamental factor at work here. What is unwinding everywhere in the world, including in the UK, is 100 years of reckless spending promises which couldn't be honestly funded through taxation. That is why credit has been so cheap for so long. It's why we've all become so dependent on quantitative easing, that is direct money creation. We've lived beyond our means for far too long, and the OBR's been used so much. I do hope people will read the fiscal sustainability report.
Well, but
because
the OBR that the government didn't want to have, the independent
just remember,
scrutiny
because this is one of those rare opportunities to put before the public The problem this country faces that in about 20 years' time, which will race past, if like me you're 50, 20 years is going to race past. In 20 years' time, we'll have exhausted the National Insurance Fund, which is more of a current account than a savings account, but nevertheless, the balance needs to be above zero, and we'll be defaulting on pensions. What I want is to be part of a government and a party which meets these age-related spending costs. The only way to do it is growth, and that's what Liz Truss is fighting for.
The Labour Party, then.
Well, no, because the Labour Party, I'm afraid, it is because of the rise of the Labour Party, Lisa. It is because of the rise of social democratic ideas.
For 12 years.
Yeah, unfortunately,
You've literally had 12 years of low growth and high taxes. And Steve, it is so offensive to say to people who can't put food on the table for their families, this country is living beyond its means. The only thing that this country can no longer afford is a Tory government.
If this programme could give me the hour necessary, I would go through the charts and graphs that I've been talking to for 12 years to explain how it's unfortunately...
But Steve, why should 12 years? You don't need an hour.
It is your ideas, the ideas of the Labour Party, that government should do more, spend more, regulate more, tax more.
You've run this economy into the ground, and you've done it at one stroke 2 weeks ago, and you've left working people paying the price.
That is absolutely not true.
Why have average fixed-term mortgages gone up by £500 when people come up for renewal
everybody has
since the mini-budget? That's not because of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. That's not because of global factors. That's not because of COVID-19. That is because of this Tory government that you're a part of.
The record of the House of Commons Treasury Committee will show that for years I've been arguing with the Bank of England about the interest rates and where they should be. They were consistently telling me, no good shaking your head, it's in the record.
The Bank of England for this mess.
They were consistently telling me that because of age-related factors, interest rates were coming down on a secular trend, that they would be low and stay low. And now we find squarely that they were wrong. Now, this is not the fault of them as individuals. There is something terribly, terribly wrong with the way monetary policy is working.
How high should interest rates be then, Steve?
Well,
it's an independent Bank of England. How high should they be?
The truth is about interest rates is that they are a price like any other. And the incredible mistake we all make is we sit back waiting for the Monetary Policy Committee to set a price, and then we're surprised when we get market fluctuations which are out of control. But we have got to
fundamentally This is a classic example of a government that doesn't respect economic institutions, and that is how we got into this mess in the first place.
We have to fundamentally think about how economies work, how we get growth, and how we're going to meet spending pledges, because we have got about 20 years until a serious default starts, and that requires us to go for growth.
You've also got people who can't put food on the table.
That's absolutely right, and that is why this conversation that we are having matters so much, because I'm from a working class background, a father who worked his whole life on building sites, ruined his joints for it. He'd probably watch this and be sitting there, scarcely able to walk. And for men like my father, who worked so hard all their life watching the money that we waste, they are not going to want a Labour government if they're given the choice between somebody with
let Lisa respond.
I genuinely don't know how you can sit there and talk about waste when this is a government that literally set fire to PPE that was unusable during the pandemic because it couldn't be used, that wrote off £12 billion in fraud to people who defrauded the state during COVID, rather than pursuing that and going after it, at a time when you gave 3 times as much money to fraudsters than the whole of the north of England during the so-called levelling up period. It just really isn't good enough, Steve. I do feel sorry for you, because you've been sent out to defend something that is completely indefensible. But I'll just say to you, the Prime Minister said a moment ago that she was sorry for the damage that she's caused. Don't undo that by trying to now blame the Bank of England, Labour Party and anybody else. You've had 12 years in government and you've brought this country to its knees.
People will have heard what I've said. I've said many things like it over many years. The reality, as I've said, is that 100 years of political economy since the 1911 National Insurance Act is now blowing up because we've lived too long on cheap credit. And unfortunately, politicians always do this. They make spending promises they can't honestly meet.
Are they Tory? Are they Tory ministers and politicians?
The centre ground of British politics, ever since the Second World War, has been a high spending, fundamentally social democratic.
What about the here and now, Steve Baker? About people now. We had at the beginning of the programme a pensioner who doesn't want to put her heating on. We have got people in the pensions industry worrying about not individual pensions at this stage, but worrying about the future of that industry and whether it will be able to stay afloat in the way it has at the moment. People are worrying about interest rates going up. So it's fine to talk about an economic policy and vision that you've had for 20 years, but what about today?
I am absolutely clear today that we've got very serious problems. The food bank in Wickham clears over 20 tonnes of food a month. It is a shocking thing, and it's one of the reasons it's happening in the South East is because for far, far too long we've had an economic model which is based on too much cheap credit. That reorientates investment away from productive purposes and leaves us with the productivity challenge we've all been wrestling with, drives up house prices, drives up asset prices and gives people enormous wealth inequality, which then drives false narratives from the left.
I'd never heard of a food bank before I was elected in 2010.
Well, that's partly...
Now there are food banks in every part of this country, and that is a direct consequence of 12 years of mismanagement of the economy,
of course,
low growth and high taxes on working people. The value of wages has fallen, people are struggling, and all you can do is sit there and talk about 20-year visions and people living beyond their means. Most people aren't living beyond their means. What is beyond its means is the Conservative government.
Well, I was talking about I was talking about the state living beyond its means. Unfortunately, what we've had is dishonest politics, and that is coming to a head now. We've got to have an honest politics.
Nothing more dishonest than the mini-budget that you announced 2 weeks ago.
We have got to have a politics.
You couldn't afford it, and you knew it.
We've got to have a politics that goes for growth.
Nick.
I'm just fascinated by the continued emphasis on growth, because the soundbite of the summer from Liz Truss is you can't tax your way to growth. But you just cancelled all the tax cuts apart from one. And the Treasury is, as we speak, drawing up plans to increase some taxes. Probably not personal taxes, but taxes on banks and businesses. So by that measure, the Prime Minister's own measure, you aren't expecting growth now because you're taxing too much.
Well, my job is, of course, in the Northern Ireland office. If I was in the Treasury, I would have forecasts at my fingertips, I'm sure. But
can you tax your way to growth?
I am absolutely clear that the future of this country relies on changing course. But if I may, there's an old joke that people would say they would come back in the next life as the bond market so they can terrify everybody. And the bond market has just terrified everybody. But your viewers and every economist watching this, everyone's got to think really seriously. What are we going to do in order to get out of a corner we've backed ourselves into as a society, not as a government, as a society?
Do you include the last 12 years of Conservative government? It's Conservatives, it's your colleagues on the Conservative benches that have been in power for those 12 years. So when you talk about dishonest politicians, you are talking about them and yourself.
I am talking... No, well, I invite anyone to look at my record on these matters.
Right, but you are talking about Tory governments.
I'm talking about every government since the 1911 National Insurance Act. But look, and it is reflected in the Office for Budget Responsibility's Fiscal Sustainability Report. And I would say to anyone that ding-dong knockabout about who's been more or less honest, it's not going to meet the challenges that 20 years ahead.
These are your words, Steve. I mean, listening to this, Lisa, people may say, what will be different with Labour? Well, listening to all this, what will be different? You do sign up broadly to many of the policies that were unveiled in the mini-budget and have subsequently been cancelled, but you're still on board with the energy price guarantee, even though it's going to be reviewed, and the same with the reversal of the national insurance contribution rise. What will fundamentally be different?
Well, first of all, I just genuinely can't believe what I'm hearing after 12 years of Tory government. We've had the blame laid at the door of the bond markets, the Bank of England, the Labour Party and society. Not a word about the Tory government that's presided over sluggish growth for 12 years and higher taxes on working people. We believe that you can only grow the economy by getting businesses and people working in every part of the country. That's why we've said we would invest in clean energy. There's 1 million jobs on the road to net zero, and we'll invest to bring them here. It's why we've said that we would cut business rates and freeze and then reform them so that we can get businesses thriving on our high streets again. We wouldn't support cuts to corporation tax because we don't think it's the right thing to do to protect the profits of the biggest companies. The biggest choice is this: who pays? There is now economic pain. There's no question about it because the government has crashed the economy. What are we going to do about it? We're going to make sure that those with the broadest shoulders bear the greatest burden. Well, taxing the big energy companies who are crying out for it, by the way. The head of Shell
except as we know from your own figures, it's only going to amount to £8 billion, which is not an insignificant...
scrap non-dom status and put more resources into the NHS. There is a clear choice on offer at the next election, and we're asking people to vote for change because this country can't afford any more of this.
Just before we go, this story in the Sunday Times, in fact, it's elsewhere too, Nick Eardley. Last night, a number 10 source denied that Sajid Javid had ever been considered for the role now filled by Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. The Prime Minister laughed out loud at the suggestion. They said she has sat in the Cabinet with Javid for 10 years and she knows who is good and who isn't. What's happened?
Well, one of the Prime Minister's most senior advisers has been suspended. Jason Steen is facing a formal investigation. I think we can see a tweet from my colleague Chris Mason, our political editor, spelling out he got the story, he got it first. We've not heard from Mr Steen about this, but there was a lot of anger among Tory MPs, I think it's fair to say, about some of the language that was used in the papers at the weekend to describe Sajid Javid, and this is the latest.
I mean, this has obviously just come out now. We were expecting a question, actually, from Sajid Javid at Prime Minister's Questions. It didn't appear. But what do you think will be the fallout from this on the Tory backbenches?
Well, look, I think that there is a mood among Conservative MPs of just anger at a lot of things that have gone on in Downing Street. A lot of the way, for example, over the last 48 hours, the Chancellor didn't commit to the triple lock-on pensions. Number 10 yesterday wouldn't commit to it. The Prime Minister now has. A lot of anger over the way things have been dealt with. Whether this quells any of it, I'm not so sure.
Thank you to you, Nick Eardley, and my other guests for today and joining me on today's programme. I will be back tomorrow at 12:15 with more Politics Live from all of us here. Bye-bye.